I'm Philip Isaacs, and today, 2 big ways that comfort zones show up in our lives. Let's get into it. All right, welcome back. Thanks for being here today. Last week, we talked about 4 ways how to tell if you're in a comfort zone. Quickly, if you didn't get to see last week's video, I included in the description below. Go on, check it out. I think you'll like it. This week, we're talking about 2 big ways that comfort zones can show up in our lives. Our comfort zones are basically the norms that we grew up in, kind of like our upbringing, or how we learn about life through our families and our surroundings. Basically speaking, it's a general view of how we see life works. You know, how to love, how to argue, how to spend money, how to save it, how to work, how to problem solve, how to compromise, etc., etc. So all those things and more really come from what we grow up in and how we're taught to do things. So basically speaking, our comfort zones and our norms are learned. And where we learn them from are our parents, our environment, the situations that we grow up in, what we encounter, and our experiences, and the stories that we tell ourselves from those experiences. So as promised, here are 2 big ways that they show up in our lives. Now, number 1, you probably guessed it, it's our relationships. Our comfort zones can really show up here and negatively impact us. And I'll use some examples to really illustrate this. Just follow along. So let's say we have a lady named Jane and a man named John. Really typical names here. So for the illustration purposes though, Jane grows up in a family where it's chaotic all the time. Since she was a little girl, all she's heard is yelling. That's how they fight. All she's seen is maybe psychological abuse, emotional neglect, emotional abuse maybe. And that's how she views the way a family should work, or a relationship should work between a husband and wife, because that's what she saw her parents do. Now, that's her comfort zone. That's her norm that she grew up in. So to her, relationships look like the way her mom and dad related to each other. Now, let's say you have John, and he grew up in a family where there wasn't a lot of yelling, maybe very minimal. And the way they worked out their problems was that they would sit down and talk about it. You know, they didn't swear at each other when they were mad. They would have I guess you can say, a cordial agreement, or if they were upset, they would take some time apart, cool down, and then come back and solve the problem at hand. So that's what John grew up seeing, that this is the way we solve problems in relationships between a husband and wife, between a couple. So you have these 2 individuals, Jane and John. They grow up to be adults now, and are pretty decent off in the world. And when let's say they meet and they hit it off, they really like each other, they date, there are no really red flags that go off in that relationship. So they get married, and it's going really great. Now, remember the comfort zones. Well, let me show you how they can play out if they're not careful. So if Jane is not careful in being aware of how she was brought up and the environment she was raised in, that chaotic environment where people are more hostile to each other, and what she'll do just to be comfortable, just to create that comfort zone, is she may create chaos. So what it could look like is John is being completely a gentleman towards her. He's respecting her, gives her space when she needs it and all that. Jane, to her, this is uncomfortable because this is not what she saw growing up. This is not how a couple relates to each other. Based on mom and dad, based on that comfort zone, there has to be some sort of fight for a relationship to be considered successful, because that's how she saw mom and dad operate. She saw mom and dad relate to each other in more of a hostile manner. And so to her, to have a successful relationship, remember, comfort zone, her norm, she has to fight. And so out of just to be comfortable, just to feel that norm, just to, be right about her upbringing, she creates chaos. Now, this is subconscious. This is her not knowing that she's doing it, but she feels a need to create chaos in the relationship just to feel at really norm, just to feel comfortable. So in essence, Jane sabotages the relationship just to feel comfortable. And this is why maybe a lot of you out there maybe can't hold a relationship for a long time because of your comfort zones. So the next example I'll use is from my own personal experience in growing up. Now, I grew up, my comfort zone when it comes to relationships was to normally rescue a woman in need, the whole damsel in distress, being a hero and needing to feel like a hero. I would actually be attracted to the types of women who needed help all the time, whether it be anything of the sort. It could be that they didn't have a car, so I would drive them places, or a number of sorts. I probably won't get into it in depth, but my comfort zone was to rescue. And so the types of women that I was dating were the one that I thought to be needed that rescuing man. And so I would play that part, but then let's say a couple months into the relationship, I would feel resentful to her, and I would then be passive aggressive, or I would be standoffish because my needs weren't being filled, or my emotional cup wasn't being filled by her, because I was always giving and giving and giving. And so from my personal point of view, in my experience, I had to take some time off completely from dating so that I could really work on this issue that I have. And so it took a couple of years, really about 4 or 5, I would say, to really isolate myself. It could have just been, I'll get into my story, maybe another video, but I took some serious time to really analyze what was going on with me, to be aware of my comfort zone so that they didn't play out, because I wanted a healthy and whole relationship. And so now I'm engaged, and she's definitely not a woman who needs to be rescued. So number 2, basically the next one that comfort zones can really show up and almost really damage somebody's growth is in work, or work ethic. So here, I'll just give you an example right quick. Let's say you have a child who grew up maybe not having to work as much for things. Maybe he was giving everything in life. Well, let's name him Jim. So let's say Jim grows up as a young child and doesn't really have to work for much, gets the toys that he wants, just has to ask his parents for anything he wants, and he gets it. Doesn't have to wait much to get it either. And so he grows up having things just given to him over and over again, not developing the skill of hard work. Now, when he grows up, and his parents aren't able to do this for him anymore, he's actually hindered in growing up. Now, the word hindered really just means to hold back. He's held back in that area of life because he didn't learn that skill as a young boy. And so basically, how this comfort zone of everybody else will provide for me, the world will take care of me, really shows up in that he either has no job when he gets older, or he either chooses jobs where he doesn't have to do much, and sometimes that means he doesn't get paid much. And what this looks like, what this type of person looks like, maybe you work with this type of person, is that they generally do the least amount of work possible, but they expect the greatest result. They expect the biggest return. So let me just say that again, this type of person who grows up having things done for them does the least amount but expects the most in return. Now, you can either have your comfort zones take control of your life, or you can take control yourself. So really check to see who's in control. Are you operating, or are you living out of what you believe is right because of your upbringing? Or are you living out your best life because you've taken control of the negative upbringing or the negative situations that you encountered in which you may view life? Are you rewriting those how-tos of the way life works so that it benefits you in your future and even your now? Here's a recap. Number 1, comfort zones show up in our relationships, in how we treat people, based on our upbringing, based on how we saw relationships being handled, whether that be how to love or how to solve problems. How we view that, how we learn that is from our parents or our guardians, or what shape and form you learn that. and they will play out in how we treat our significant other. And number two, comfort zones and our norms play out in our work or our work ethic. How we viewed hard work or what was needed to be successful comes from our parents or our guardians or whatever we saw growing up. And so generally speaking, if we're not careful, we will repeat those actions. So if we didn't need to work much growing up, then we're going to have a comfort zone that we won't have to work much when we're adults or in our jobs now. So those are two big ways that comfort zones can show up in your life. Now, I can get a lot more in depth with this. I do that with my clients one-on-one. However, what are some of your comfort zones that you think that you have, or maybe you've seen the people around you, or maybe you just had an idea now of a comfort zone that you can identify? Just comment below. I'd love to read them, and maybe we can have a discussion on that. That's it from me. I'm Philip Isaacs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next week.